happened. But the reality is, yes, even Mary Ruddock, when she actually was recently in Africa, she'd actually met a number of centenarians amongst these tribal populations, including the Maasai. So they just have high infant mortality. That's all it is. When people say, my great-grandfather lived 107 on my father's side, but the infant mortality was very high. My grandmother, she basically lost six of her kids, and only 4 of the 10 survived. So she had a 60% loss. So that can really affect that infant mortality can really affect the data saying, the average life expectancy is 40. Yeah, because more than half the children are wiped out before they even get a foothold on planet Earth. Give us a break. It is just nonsense. And when it comes to ancestral populations, we've got no idea how long they lived. Absolutely no idea. That's just bullshit. Just because we find children buried around the campfires, because obviously children didn't go out hunting. They died at infancy if they died, and they would be buried close by. So the numbers of children in those burial sites close by are much larger than the adult ones, because the adults in many times died out on the hunt or got bitten by a snake and died or whatever. So they never even got back to be buried close by. So yes, it's nonsense. Most of that sort of stuff. That's why it's unreliable. It's completely and utterly nonsense. Anybody that uses average life expectancy data from the past, which is all extrapolated, which means adjusted, which basically means fabricated, and and how well the fabrication happens depending on what agenda you're running. We have to ignore average life expectancies of our ancestors because in terms of the data, in terms of record keeping in the past, is irrelevant. It's very poor. The other thing is a lot of these societies were upended in different ways due to calamities. So there are a whole lot of factors. We today live in an environment where it's pretty safe. You got a police force, you got a lot of things that keep things relatively, depending on the society you're living in, but relatively most societies are fairly safe. So the death rates are much lower. Really good medicine and many other things. You go back in those societies, the death rate was much higher. That's why they used to have so many children, because you did not know how many would survive. Not many did, do all sorts of calamities and whatever. Warfare. There's all sorts of calamities that actually killed off a lot of people. So infant mortality and loss in warfare and all that is irrelevant. If we're really going to look at, we should be looking at how many people live on average within our society over the age of, let's say, 70 or 80 or stuff like that. That's the sort of comparison. And we can only do that in more recent times because we've got data. If we go back in the past, we don't have much data. And when we look at that, in the last couple of decades, there's not a massive difference. And then you'd also have to adjust it based on the population. You'd have to do it on the actual numbers of the population and make some sort of adjustment. So the moment you make an adjustment is who's making the adjustment and how are they making the statistical adjustment for that. It's, as you can understand, it's prone to bias and miscalculations of all sorts. So yeah,